Hello, everybody. Very nice to see you. This is a recorded event. This event will be recorded for publication later on our website. So if you cannot join now, you can revisit this speech, and you will see, of course, the value of digitization and the value of digital for port decarbonization. Claire.
Hi, everybody. So let's begin with today's webinar, Digital for Port Decarbonization. We will begin with a short introduction by Roland, then Olivier Jamard from GE Power Conversion and Vincent Doudet from Sustainable Ships will both present for 20 minutes each. We will conclude with a Q&A session. So during the presentation, please put your microphone on mute, please, if you're not speaking, and ask your question in the chat so the speaker will be able to answer during the Q&A session. Roland, your turn.
Great, Claire. Thank you very much. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session on digital for port decarbonization. Two tremendous speakers. I wanted to, maybe you can go to the next slide. So next slide after that. So let me put back a few thoughts around onshore power supply. There's a few things that have changed and why this topic has suddenly become so popular and so obviously in vogue. First of all, there's a dynamic in the renewable industry that I think nobody can deny. This is a substantial growth of the investments in renewable production. You will have seen this from areas around Europe, but as well the rest of the world, Japan, the Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. And you will follow the development of offshore production, onshore production, with its wind, solar, and so on and so forth. Of course, every one of you is following as well the development of electrification of mobility in its general. So, for example, mobility of cars and so on and so forth. A couple of other thoughts that have changed recently. So there's been the advent of legislation. There's two big texts being worked on. The first one is Fuel EU Maritime at European level, and the second one is the alternative fuel text. Last week, we had a very positive return from the proposals made in Fuel EU Maritime, which is a very good news because it shows that there is legislative capability behind the ambition, and that's important. So when you see a sector growing and developing, legislation helps. Clearly, you want the legislation being effectively the stick, but at the same time, you want the carrot, and that is sufficient funding, and we'll talk about it. Another development that we're seeing is more local, and you will have highlighted the recent vote. This is recent, 2 or 3 years ago, of Amsterdam City, that basically is announcing the end of thermal produced energy for ships in the canals from 2025. So from 2025, you will no longer be able to sail in the canals with a traditional 2-stroke or 4-stroke engine. This is really key. We're all following that development. We're all going to be seeing how quickly this is going to evolve and how many ships are going to be retrofitted, but key for the retrofit market. The second big term, and this is perhaps the next page, this is a message I think we're all following with great attention. You will have seen the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. You have seen that aside from, of course, the act itself, which is legislation, the US is announcing quite a substantial amount of money for support, which is $369 billion is being announced. This is a substantial amount of money. A lot is invested in the electrification of mobility, renewable energy offshore, and so on and so forth. Europe is, of course, since von der Leyen went to the US, Europe is working on the Net Zero Industry Act, and this will be in the region of 272 billion. This is less than the US, but it's still a substantial amount of money coming our way. And then China, of course, little to say about how much they're investing because the volumes of money that they've been investing over the years, and some of you who travel to China will remember that about 20 years ago, you basically were walking around Shanghai and it was highly polluted, or Beijing. And today, most of the mobility is done with electrification. So the amount of money that China is investing into greening is substantial. The message behind this is that money is coming, money is going to be available. The question is now, how does it trickle down to our industry? And this is what EOPSA is standing for. Our industry is going to be standing for generation. Our industry is going to be standing for innovation, education, and of course, the topic of today. And I'm really proud to welcome our two top speakers, Olivier and Vincent, to talk about central to this is the digitization of the energy market. Olivier, may I ask you to join us for your
Thank
presentation?
you, Roland. Thank you, Roland. Let me share my screen, and I will start the presentation in a tick. Okay. Now, hopefully it works, and because I'm sharing, I no longer see the videos. So Olivier Jamard, I'm the executive director for microgrids and also for digital at GE Power Conversions, and I am based in Paris, in France, at the headquarters. I will try to keep it short. I was told we only have 20 minutes. Okay, it's working. So, digital at the heart of maritime decarbonization. So today I'm going to go a little bit behind the ports. I will talk about maritime as a whole, and as you will see, I will cover as well the vessel side as well as the ports. Now we are seeing increased push towards decarbonization in marine, and it's essentially driven by several factors. One is the IMO regulations that is calling for reduced greenhouse gas emissions and fuel reporting. We are also now seeing the ships that are required to have this SEEMP, the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, to be readily available. We also see, and we as an OEM, we see it all the time actually, we see oil majors requesting for fuel-efficient vessel to charter. And that's typically because they actually pay for the fuel. And finally, we see the merchant and offshore markets looking towards optimizations for reducing emissions. So there are many drivers that exist, and yet I would like to highlight few things about energy transition. So achieving energy transition is very complex and requires intensive situational awareness, which we also refer about big data, and that can only be met through the analysis of a lot of data. Achieving energy transition also means integrating and controlling multiple sources of energy generation, and that's including renewable whilst maintaining a resilient grid ecosystem. And you may have read a lot about the penetrations of energy renewable and the impact that has on the grid. It's quite complex to manage. And finally, I would like to say that achieving energy transition also mean optimizing energy consumption efficiency. I always say to my client that the greenest energy of all is the one we do not consume. So looking at digital technology now. So digital technologies are fully embedded in the full energy value chain from power generation to consumption, as you can see on this slide. And although we are not showing it here, digital applications are also used, for example, to control, let's say, the wind turbine blade pitch in order to optimize the energy throughput. But you will also find digital technology used to maintain the transmission and distribution grid resiliency, and also securing both the remote and on-site energy capacity and efficiency. I can hear some background noise, so perhaps if we could go on mute, that would be great. Thank you very much. Finally, we also see some many digital applications that are geared towards minimizing the use of energy and really focusing on improving the overall system efficiency. So on this slide, I've highlighted 3 types of digital applications that we will encounter in our journey to decarbonize the maritime sector. But of course, there are many more to come. So I've highlighted microgrid energy management, and I will discuss this a little bit more in this presentation. I've highlighted energy optimization, also sometimes fuel optimization. I will also take you through this. And the last one I've highlighted is asset performance management, so APM. And this one may feel like a little bit a stretch from decarbonization, but I will show you also why managing or why monitoring our assets is actually key for maintaining the efficiency of the system as a whole. So not only we find digital technologies across the complete value chain or energy value chain, but we also find those across each and every energy asset life cycle. What I call an asset can be a motor, a drive, can also be a vessel, so a system, but can also be a port terminal, for example, which is a system of systems. And each of those assets, they go through what we call life cycle. Typically, those life cycles include the design phase, the operation phase, and the services phase, to simplify it. Now, if we look during the design phase, digital application, they can be found in the form of modeling tools or simulator. And this is very common. And I will take you through a few examples for those. During the operational phase, the focus is more on collecting and feeding real-time data to some kind of optimization tools that enable, for example, port terminals or vessels to minimize their energy usage, but also reduce their emission. And finally, during the services phase, we see some real-time monitoring of the health conditions of any kind of assets. And remember, assets can be motors or vessels, or can actually be ports, port terminals. And so those health monitoring systems, they really enable us to maintain the optimum system efficiency and maintain low emission. I often use the case of the car, right? So if we don't take our car to the mechanics frequently, eventually your engine will get out of tune. And once your engine is out of tune, you start consuming more fuel. And by consuming more fuel, you start increasing your carbon emissions. So it's the same for a vessel, or it's the same for a port terminal in many ways. Now, if we look at ports, so I will take two examples in this presentation. I will look first of all at port terminal, and then I will look at vessels, and I will go through the different life cycle phases to show you where we find some digital applications. So if we look at port decarbonization, it typically starts with the electrification of port terminals. And that essentially means replacing thermal engine-driven assets with electrical motors, drive, unless, of course, there are some low carbon or carbon neutral fuels available. Think about cranes, think about vehicle fleet that you may find in the port. Think about shore power or any kind of industrial process that you may actually find on the port terminal. So assuming a port is electrified, the energy demand of that port will drastically increase and will require to be green, right? There is no point electrifying a port if you import carbonized electricity from some coal-fired power station nearby. So this additional green energy capacity can come from the deployment of local renewable power in the form of solar or wind turbine. And we typically deploy those behind the meter in the port configuration, and it is typically connected to the grid. We call this a microgrids, where you have local power generations connected to local loads and electrically managed, as well as being grid connected or islanded. Now, since those port terminals, they are typically connected to the grids in most cases, the addition of this new power needs somehow to be orchestrated with the grid, of course, and that requires some kind of software. That software, we call it an energy management system, and I will talk a bit more about it later on. Of course, in order to maintain this new ecosystem efficient, we also need some kind of condition monitoring system to be installed, and that's something that is going to be monitoring the health of the assets and try to identify potential wears that could potentially impact the overall system energy efficiency, and as such increase the emissions that from those assets. Okay, let me talk about a couple of examples that we use in General Electric, and here I'm focusing on the port electrification. So this tool called Hybrid Architect, it's a typical example of modeling tool. And we use it to design hybrid or renewable power generation stations that can either be front of the meter or behind the meter being the boundary between the grid, electrical grid, and your facility. So you can have this installed behind or in front. We use this tool either during the conception phase or during the commercial phase. And we use it to identify and size renewable assets, including storage solutions, in order to minimize the curtailed power. The curtailed power is the power that you can generate but are not able to consume, and that becomes essentially wasted. And so the sizing of any kind of renewable power station or power plant is very important because you don't want to oversize your capex, otherwise your financials are pretty much killed right at the beginning of the project. So we use this during the conception phase or commercial phase, and one of the great functions of this modeling tool, not only it enables us to configure and size the power plant, but it also looks at the level cost of electricity, which is the cost of energy that you're producing, and the potential return on investment for the developer. And as I've explained, there is no successful projects, even in renewable, unless there is a very clear path to return on investments for any developer. And this is the same for everything. So we can, as you can see on the right-hand side, we can use this tool also for many different types of use cases, and they are listed here. And of course, as with any other digital solution, the use of such a tool enables us also to reduce what we call the design cycle time. And as you know, designing phase can take many months in some cases or many weeks. And so using modeling and simulation really enable us to speed that up and accelerate it, but also it enables us to de-risk the overall project development. So now that we have installed, let's say, a microgrid in the port in order to electrify it, we have, during the operation of that port terminals, now we need to manage this new energy flow that exists between the local power or the local renewable energy and the grid connected energy, right? So you need to have a system that basically plays the controller between both and start doing some load balancing or load shedding between the different systems on the generation side and also on the load side. So this energy management system, which we also call a microgrid controller, it comes with two large families of functions, and you see them on the slide here. There is a real-time functions that take care of essentially of dispatching energy between renewable, grid-connected, and the different load installs. And it can go down to the process level, so you can decide to shed processes if you don't have enough energy, as an example. It is also used to provide a basic grid services if it is grid-connected, such as voltage and frequency regulation. And this is really key to maintain the resiliency of the nearby grid. What else can I say? The assets that we'll find typically on those electrified ports, I've mentioned it earlier on, but I want to reiterate this, right? So there are going to be electrified cranes, chargers, industrial processes, onshore power supply. This onshore power supply that we keep talking at the EOPSA is really important in the whole electrification process of a port. This is really increasing the electricity capacity or demand that the port terminal will require. So it's really essential to have a way to not only bring this new energy to the port, but also to manage it. There is so I spoke about the real-time function. Now the optimization functions, this is the second large family that we'll find in an EMS system. This one is going to take care of what we call market participation, and essentially is going to help you trading tariffs, so exporting, importing based on the price of electricity at the time that you are interacting with the grid. It's also going to connect to large database on weather forecasting. It's important for your renewable to understand how much solar you will be able to produce or how much wind you will be able to capture and convert to electricity. And so we'll do this through the connections of some database, or sometimes we also have a specific sensors deployed at site to also make sense of the daily forecast. It's also going to be connected to, let's say, some vessel scheduling management system or the SOC, the shipper own container management system. And this is going to collect all this information and data in order to optimize what is the best way to move those electrons, which is the best way to capitalize on the overall infrastructure, including storage, perhaps, and then maybe time where it is more economically viable to store this renewable energy rather than use it and maybe use it at a later point. So on the last point I want to say about the EMS is what you see on this diagram is the fact that this microgrid system is also interconnected with the loads and with the power generation, and is continuously interfacing and communicating to really understand what's happening at any point in time. Okay, now let's have a look at vessels. This particular example is an electrical, it's an electric propulsion vessels where the propulsion system is decoupled from the hybrid or thermal generator. And basically the vessel speed in such a configuration is controlled directly through the variable speed drives or frequency converters. That has an advantage. Obviously, it enables us to set the thermal generator to its optimum load point. And as you know, in any thermal engine, there is an optimum point where the emissions are kind of optimized. And if you drive your load lower, usually you increase your emissions, which is quite strange, but that's the way it works. So by using those variable speed drives, we can essentially manage the vessel speed whilst maintaining the thermal engine at the right optimum set point. We are also just thinking about vessel decarbonization. We're also seeing more and more vessels with battery storage that are installed, and we also know that there is a lot of alternative fuel like LNG, biofuels, ammonia that are under evaluation. Hydrogen, ammonia is a form of hydrogen for further shipping decarbonization. So, similarly to the port terminal, which I've just explained. We can see that digital technology are also found in vessel life cycle in the form of modeling and simulation during the design phase. And there are a few examples here. It's used in the form of optimization or fuel optimization in this case during operations. And again, we'll find this asset performance management during the service phase, which really enable us to maintain a low level of emissions or an efficiency level during the operations. So here again, I will take you through a couple of examples that we have or tools that we use in GE, but there are many more, of course. And we have, this is very similar to hybrid architect in some ways. This tool called Vessel Performance Analyzer, it's a tool that we use during the commercial phase. And by the way, this is not a commercialized tool, right? So we use it for our own purposes. And we use it to support our client with the design of their power management system and associated thrusters. So essentially, what this tool does is based on the type of ship and also expected sea conditions that our clients will have. And through the use of Monte Carlo simulations, it's like millions of scenarios being assessed to see what is the best configuration. We are able not only to define the optimum number of thrusters, but also their type, their size, their location on the vessel. And we can also recommend the most efficient GE drive that the client should install or should have in their design. So it's a pretty clever tool that really improve the overall efficiency of the design, but pretty much like hybrid architect as well. It also enables us to reduce the design cycle time during conceptions or during the commercial discussions. Similarly to the ports, we also find some optimization tools during the operations of the vessel. So here we've put an example called Operation Plus. This is again a GE tool, and this tool this tool is actually commercialized. This is a decision support digital solution that we use to help our client to minimize the energy footprint of the vessel by optimizing the fuel consumptions and reducing emissions. So what does the tool do? It monitors the vessel operation, its environment, including power generation, propulsion system, environmental forces. It looks also at the dynamic positioning control system. And with all those insights, the solution managed to achieve, through very clever algorithms, managed to achieve reduction in fuel emissions and maintenance costs, and without compromising the vessel redundancy margin and operating frequency, right? So we don't want to trade that off for, yes, less emissions, but this is going to cost more, right? You always have to keep this cost notion in mind, even whilst you're doing decarbonization. We have achieved, so the typical savings on with such solution is around 10%, but we have achieved in some cases up to 30% reductions of fuel consumptions with some clients. You can see on the right-hand side here, I've put a couple of screenshots. There are dashboards that essentially are used. So there are dashboards that are installed on the vessel itself, but we also have dashboards that are in the cloud and potentially accessible from the fleet managers if there are more than one boat. And those dashboards, they really allow the crew to make informed real-time decisions on how best to operate their system, and of course, on how to address IMO regulations on emissions. Now, let me finish with the services phase. So I spoke about the design phase, both for port terminal as well as vessel. I spoke about the operation phase for port terminals and vessels. And now I would like to talk about the services phase. And it just happened that for services, whether it is on a vessel or in a port, essentially the digital application in our case will be the same. And they take the form of what we call this asset performance management system. So what do we do during the service phase? We use this APM or this digital technology to monitor the health of our electrical assets. And we do this by basically, we're doing this by basically connecting to the different assets. We use both physics and functional algorithms. So let me explain this a little bit. So the APM solution is connected to our assets. We use some very fast frequency data acquisition system to collect information from the motors or from the drive. And by doing that, we are able to and also by using some mathematical algorithm like fast Fourier transform, we are able to essentially identify early sign of wear outs, and we can identify early signs of failure modes that we know of. And that basically enables us to start programming services actions or to do what we call predictive maintenance. So why is it important to do predictive maintenance, and why is it important to decarbonizations? Again, I want to take you back to the car analogy, which is if you don't maintain your car appropriately, you will eventually consume more fuel and therefore increase your carbon emissions. It's going to be the same here on the vessels, also on our port terminal. You can see the screenshot at the bottom here. It's a screenshot from a dashboard that we use, which is cloud-based, by the way. And you can see that it's monitoring several generators, and you can see the negative trending on one of the generators. So what our tool managed to do is look in time series, analyze the time series, and start looking at the different failure mode, and essentially warns the operator that there is a generator that has abnormal activities, and that really enables to launch some predictive maintenance actions or some repairs. Okay, I'm going to summarize, and hopefully I'm still within the time. So we've looked at digital technology that are at the heart of maritime decarbonization. It's totally integrated in the energy value chain. I've also presented the digital tools that are embedded in all energy asset life cycle, and that's from design to operation and to services. I think I want to say something about digital. Perhaps I haven't mentioned it enough, but digital comes in many shapes and forms, and it's kind of a buzzword, right? It's used in many ways, and we have to be careful because digital at the end of the day can be, machine learning, can be statistical analysis, can be some rule-based as well. So it's not always artificial intelligence, as some people may want to let you think, but there are some very statistical analysis tools that can really help you with managing assets better and managing efficiency. We discussed a few examples that I took out of GE experience in both the marine and port segment. So hybrid architect, for example, to design renewable power plants, the EMS system that we're using to manage the energy flow and perform efficient load balancing and load shedding. We've looked at this vessel performance analyzer tool to design the vessel power system. We also look at this optimizer that reduces the fuel consumption. So we looked at few examples. I know it's just scratching the tip of the iceberg, but that hopefully is giving you some idea on how digital technology can help with the decarbonization. We also show that modeling tools and simulators are very often used during design phase, whereas during the operation phase, we acquired a lot of real data, right? So there is a large ingestions of big data that is required in order to really make sense of what's happening. And of course, and we also show that during the services phase we are doing something similar, right? So not only during the operations in order to optimize, we use a lot of data, but also during the maintenance phase and to perform predictive maintenance, we also make use of a lot of data coming from the different sources, the different assets, and the different power generators, and this really enables us to contain and to maintain efficiency. I'm going to stop here, because I think I'm right on time, and I'm going to pass the mic to Vincent, who is going to take you through the second part of the presentation.
Many thanks, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Claire, you wanted to mention something, or?
No, just to thank you, thanks Olivier.
Yeah, great.
Well, of course, thank you both, but of course, Vincent, thanks for joining us. And you're, aside from leading sustainable ships, you're of course an EOPSA ambassador, which is always a pride.
Thank you, Roland. I'm grateful for being here. I'm grateful for everyone who I can see now on Olivier's screen for being here as well. I was told we have people from across the world joining us, so that's terrific. There we go. Before we no, I'll be honest, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I have an interactive demo for you at the ready. Before we start, I'll quickly tell you something about myself, and I'm going to ask you one question. If there is somebody in the audience who is willing to become a volunteer, who is in need of a decarbonization roadmap for their vessel, interested in costs of different decarbonization measures and also reduction measures, let us know in the chat and we can do the interactive demo together, and you will get a free premium decarbonization roadmap that we'll work on during the demo. So that's enough for introduction. First, something about me. I started as a sustainability advisor in 2016, which is not very long ago, but long enough to remember times that all the legislation that Ronald was speaking of and Olivier hinted at as well was non-existent. And I was also lucky enough to not just be one of the first, but to be part of a project or leading the shore power project in Rotterdam, Canal Canal, which is a pretty big shore power project. And I think that's where I caught the virus, not just for shore power, but for making vessels sustainable. And at that point, I also realized I want to help other ship owners. So my personal goal, and also therefore the goal of sustainable ships, is to make your life easier. That is the life of ship owners and companies in the maritime space. And we do this by simply giving, you could say, a first aid for sustainability. So we do feasibility studies, estimations, and providing roadmaps for ship owners and companies who do not have the time or the people to figure it out for themselves. And these are not quite as complicated as the models that Olivier just sent or showed us, but they give a good estimation of what you can do and where you can start your sustainability journey, given the light of all the upcoming rules and regulations that we have coming for us. So that being said, I see there are currently no volunteers. If that's the case, Roland, I believe then you were the volunteer.
Glad to be the volunteer, but I'm afraid I don't have a 5,000 gross tons vessel, so I'll do my best.
Sure, I'll first share my screen with you to show the tool. There we go. Can you see the tool itself?
Of course.
Also put a link. I also put a link in the chat so you can play around with it yourself. You said you don't have a 5,000 tons vessel. Do you have something else in mind?
Well, I gather you scroll down. Yes, I think today I'll be the owner of a container ship.
A container ship, great. So is it a big or a small container ship?
It's a medium size. It's a short sea shipping, so it does Rotterdam, Vilnius.
All right, so like a coaster feeder, roughly. Well, we'll just leave it at 6,500 kilowatts then.
Great.
Yeah. All right, well, with a push of a button, you get a menu. If it only was this easy in real life. This is the menu of currently identified decarbonization measures. Here on top, we can choose our measures. We'll do that shortly. And here we have some preferential views. We have a few measures for you. Well, knowing you, Roland, you're going to go for shore power, I'm guessing.
Really?
Of course. Well, here we see shore power for your vessel. We have the measure, carbon reduction estimate. We'll give a breakdown later. Estimated cost, and also the delta OPEX. So that's the difference in your OPEX before and after the measure. In this case, we see it will cost you 200 euros additional a day, but maybe we can tweak it a little bit so you don't have a payback of your investment. Before we dive into the rest of the menu and also the costs, first something about your vessel. I have your operational profile here. So this is a estimated yearly profile. So you're idling a little bit, probably in port, and then you're sailing for about 75% of the time. Is that correct?
That's fair. That's fair.
That's fair. Okay. You can always change it, of course, later, Roland, if you want to have more or less idling days. I'm going to guess if we do more idling days here, probably the shore power measure will be better in terms of OPEX. So we'll change it a little bit to show how it works. And also here's an estimated OPEX breakdown. This is a lot of information, so you don't have to store this. What we do use it for is to see if your fuel consumption sort of corresponds with what you normally have to get a representative estimate of your vessel consumption. And if that's not the case, we can change engine characteristics so that you have a better estimate of your fuel consumption, and also here your fuel and ship parameters. We do have to change your name, Roland, the name of your vessel. So what's she called?
Lady Booty.
Okay. With BWOTI?
Yes.
There we go. Lady Booty. Well, that's a name to remember. All right. For those who don't know the upcoming rules and regulations, we also made a decarbonization timeline. It's basically what Roland also mentioned. This one's focused on Europe area because you mentioned Europe just now, Roland. But we have different regions.
Let's stay in Europe. Yeah.
Let's stay in Europe. Good. The target date here is simply an estimate of when your vessel will be, I wouldn't say scrapped, but until end of service of your vessel. As you can see, if you move towards 2050, you're approaching roughly 70% decarbonization. And if we go a little bit earlier, sooner, it's still 50%. I wouldn't say that's manageable. It's still quite a lot, but fair is fair. And we also have energy majors. For a lot of our clients, it's also very good to know what energy majors and shipping companies are doing. So we're upgrading this with more and more companies as soon as their roadmaps become available. And it gives you an estimate of how much you need to decarbonize when. And also here we have an overview or a breakdown of all the different rules and regulations or the legislations that we were speaking of. I got to say, for container ships, it's quite a lot. Container ships and also passenger vessels, they're targeted by many regulatory bodies. All right, back to the good stuff, shore power. So let's stick to shore power for a moment. Like I said, we have different visualization tables. This one is one of my favorites. Well, where it's actually negative at the moment, going down. We have an investment, and then each year we pay more and more on the Lady Booty for Roland. But of course, every vessel is unique, and also the capex and opex, and also the measurements that you do are unique. So I have an electricity price of 35 cents, but Roland, knowing you, I bet you can get a discount on your electricity price, right?
Correct. We're negotiating every day with the energy providers, so it's about volume, yes.
So what do you say, 25 cents? Would that be?
Let's go for 25, yeah. Let's go, 25. Let's try.
There we go, and it's already going up. As you can see, the beauty of this system is, okay, you have 25 cents, but what would be the price to break even in, let's say, 5 years? So there we go. It's, well, 2 lessons we can learn here. It's extremely sensitive to electricity price. Only 1 cent deviation will give you 2 years payback rate sooner. And about 22 cents, my recommendation for you, Roland, go for 22 cents instead of 25.
Right.
That'll give you a very good estimate. And try to also fix that for up until 2028 at least. Yeah.
Yep.
And then not everybody is well, okay, hold on. I want to say not everybody is interested in shore power. That's not true. Everybody is interested in shore power, but there's also other things, for example, when you're sailing. So let's go for a change fuel, Roland. Is there a change fuel of your preference that you would like to investigate?
Yeah, I'm on for hydrogen. I don't think it's going to be tomorrow, but down the line we'll see more and more hydrogen being available. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know for a fact these parameters here, they're quite expensive because we need to be conservative in our first estimates. Otherwise, we get a lot of disappointed ship owners. But fuel price of 12 euros per kilogram hydrogen, do you think that's fair? Do you want to go down?
Honestly, I don't. I'm turning to the audience. If someone can put in the chat what they feel is the appropriate fuel price for hydrogen today. As I said, I don't expect it to be available today. I think it's going to be available 5, 10, maybe 15 years down the line. So it's a bit of a pie in the sky.
You're right. It's also a feasibility study, right?
Sure.
It's not the price we pay at the pump right now. So
sure.
We can maybe reduce it a little bit.
We see a response at 25. We see someone who put in the chat 25.
Even more. Okay, that's fair.
Happy to test at 25.
Yeah. One of the things we also include here is volume versus weight ratio. So for a lot of vessels, that's pretty important. And we standardize for the current fuel that you use. By the way, it's HFO. You might want to reconsider that. And here you see hydrogen is, in terms of volume, you need about 20 times more volume, but in terms of kilograms, you probably, there you go, need a lot less. So this is one of the other types of decision makings that you can do with the tool itself. Yeah. All right. I saw some comments. I don't know if we have time to see if that. Yeah, we'll do one comment of Laurent about the power demand when moored shall be higher than 430. Sure thing. We go to the operational profile here, and then we have power demands higher than 430. So we can quickly change to 450. There we go. And that should immediately change everything in the entire model as well. And then we go back to our standard table. And here you see the delta OPEX also change. So this is, let's go back to the beginning. We want to give first aid. We don't want to give a finalized end solution at this point. We cannot do that. That's what you have to be with Olivier for. What we can do is give you an estimate. So this would be able to give you very quick estimates on whether or not it would be feasible and under which circumstances. And then finally, I'm going to show you the end result, because we do have a Get Your Decarbonizer report here below. It's going to take a few minutes before everything gets compiled and sent to a report. So I made a preliminary version here. So in the end, this is going to say the booty, Roland's vessel, not a bulk carrier, of course, but a container ship with all the information compiled of your different decarbonization measures, an overview of your ship characteristics, OPEX, etc., everything down to rules and regulations. And here we see the table that we had just now with more details on, for example, shore power specifics. And that's the end result. And this is the report that we use in our discussions with ship owners in order to help them on their sustainability journey. One of the things that we see helps them a lot is that it makes them able to do some long-term decision makings, whether or not you want to go for different types of fuel, depending on types of ship, rules and regulations, etc., etc. And that's the first aid for sustainability. Thank you for
well, this looks extremely promising, and thank you very much, Vincent, for showing us this this tool, because I've come out of these two presentations reassured, even excited, even convinced that we're on the right track, because digitalization is at the heart of decision making. It's at the heart of distribution and other topics that are key. So really, thank you very much, Vincent and Olivier, for these two presentations. I hope you guys, we've got a bit of time. We've got a few minutes left, 12 minutes left. So I hope you guys are open for a few questions. I see there's a couple of questions already in the chat, but I think we've got questions for you, Vincent. If I can start with one question that I received actually directly. There was a question in the calculations you made. You argue that a ship will be idle for 25% of its time, which is basically only 25% it will use shore power. But there is a time that you may not take into idle time, which is the time that it waits outside of ports. It's part of sailing. It may be, for example, waiting time. Would you be able to add in your calculation that waiting time, knowing that there is innovation going on around e-buoys from blue water or other solutions that you could do for waiting area?
Absolutely. I mean, there's only so much time, like you mentioned before, people came into the meeting itself, Roland. We already have that in the premium model itself. So you have a ratio of really hooked on to shore power and other idling more time. So that's already calculated in. And you can vary these ratios according to what you believe is most representative to your vessel. So then you only have, for instance, 50% of the time when you're idle moored shore power available, and the rest would still be on your auxiliary engines. Yeah.
Interesting. And Olivier, there was a question for you around the ports that are today you would see as being front runners in the microgrid application. We know that, for example, Los Angeles was very strong in its distribution of electricity. Have you seen other ports around the world that are working on microgrids, that have actually worked on the complexity of generation and distribution and sale at location?
So Port de Marseille, for example, is currently looking for 20 megawatts microgrid, and essentially because they cannot get enough capacity from Enodis, right? It's completely capacity driven, but it's also decarbonization driven. So that's one example. We have example in UK with PD ports, where we have ports also looking at decarbonizing and essentially reducing their cost of electricity through the use of microgrids. And we are doing some conceptual study. Actually, we have completed conceptual study. We are now going into the 65% design. As you may know, microgrids take several phases. You start by conceptual techno-economic studies, because the cost is always a key to look at. And then you go in through 30% design, 65% design before you procure and build. So this is where we are at today. Yeah, so, and we've also had some interesting projects where we've evaluated the energy recovery from cranes on ports, right? So electrifying the cranes and then looking at whenever they drop the loads, how much energy can we recover and bring this back into the distribution network and back into storage, for example.
Interesting. I'm going to I'm going to turn to the audience. If there are any questions, please raise your hand and you can raise the question. So is the audience, I see no raised hands. In that case, it sounds like it's been extremely clear, but my sense is I do have a question to Vincent. Vincent, when you see the different digital solutions that are being offered by a company such as General Electric and what Olivier just talked about, do these solutions help you think about the models and the ideas that you're developing for ship owners? Is there a correlation between the two?
My hands are tingling, Roland. I really want to talk to Olivier about details. I'd say, again, I do the first aid, so the bandages, and then Olivier has the more complicated models, also not just complicated, connected to the vessel. We give estimates, but if you do not have the, well, it doesn't have to be real time, but if you don't have the vessel operational data, there's always so much you can do. So yeah, I'd see it as a continuation of where we leave off. So that's also my personal invite to Olivier to talk further once he has.
Yeah. With great pleasure. You know, if I can add a comment, we see an emergence of digital platform in the marine industries, and we are working with several partners where they are starting embedding several types of solutions under the same platform, either on the vessel itself or sometime at shore. because you don't necessarily need to carry everything on the vessels. You can actually, using your, I don't know, as an example, there is a lot of information available from your voyage data recorder that you can capture and it is already transmitted back to shore. You can make use of all this data and you can ingest this data into very clever algorithm at shore to provide insights to the vessel crew. And we see an emergence of that happening.
I would venture that digital continues to be a great tool for decarbonization, especially in understanding your basic profile. I think whether you're talking about at home or within your industrial focus, understanding what you're using and how you're using it and the times you're using it is going to be key. And I think one of the big topics that EOPSA is going to be talking about next week is what we call boat to grid. So it's inverting, and it's what you said a bit earlier, Olivier, and I think is the ability for a ship to give back to the grid. And this is the type of solutions that, whether you're an inland vessel, a port, or you're an international port, both will be very interesting to develop. I take this opportunity to see that there's a raised hand from Ibrahim. Please ask your question.
Thank you, Roland, for giving me a chance to speak. This is Ibrahim. So my question is, since the concept is about the distribution of renewable energy, and the end is about decarbonizations of ports. So, like, how do you see? Even though Roland say that opting for hydrogen energy is something that will going to happen in say in 10 years time, but how do you see pushing for for green hydrogen energy in that aspect in your modules and solutions? How do you see that? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Olivier, can you take that question?
So, hey, hydrogen energy. Wow, what a fascinating topic. So I think Roland, you said earlier on that we wish your boats to be running off hydrogen, but it won't be for tomorrow. You're right. There is still a big question marks around this. We see some of our customers going more towards biofuels, some other customers thinking about ammonia. And by the way, ammonia is a nitrogen form of energy. Actually, it's a better form in the sense that it's easier to carry than hydrogen. Hydrogen takes a lot of space. Having said that, ammonia is highly corrosive. So do we really want to have 50,000 boats in the sea with full of ammonia in their tanks? Question mark, the open question. So that's for the vessel. Now, we do see a lot of interest around the use of fuel cells, especially for auxiliary motors, right? This would be a first step. Before we think about the full propulsions, we can already use hydrogen and fuel cells for the auxiliary motors. We also see this in ports and microgrids, more generally speaking, where potentially, and again, depends on the supply of hydrogen, you can replace fuel-based generators with fuel cell and hydrogen supply. And I have few examples, not for ports, but I have few examples in remote communities where we're looking at deploying microgrids and we're replacing the diesel generators with fuel cells, because we know that there is a supply of hydrogen. And that enables us to develop zero emissions microgrids, which is quite key. And this could be brought to port as well, right? Because there is a lot of hydrogen production facilities popping up in the world that are on the coast, because of course the big market is about exporting hydrogen. Australia is a big country of that. So it should be readily available. So it will happen. It will happen. The question is in what shape, what type, and what for, right? And also for what mileage.
Yeah, I subscribe to that. There's an important topic here, and I sense that our follow-on webinar will be about the integration of shore power and hydrogen. It sounds like we're going to be having to do a nice follow-up discussion around that, especially as we have a number of members who are very much engaged in in hydrogen, thinking about Bloom Energy as one. Listen, there's only 1 minute left, so I think we're going to cut it short. One of the things we like to do is to be spot on time, keep it to an hour. So 1 minute to thank my speakers is way too little because they've done a fantastic job in preparing. More importantly, I'm proud of what is being shown today. Look, digital is vast. As Olivier was saying, don't mistake digital for AI. See digital as a real enabler. And when I see what Vincent is doing with sustainable ships, this really opens the conversation for ship owners to look at different solutions and really decide with the background of data what they can do to be able to speed up their decarbonization process and be ready for the legislation that's coming our way. I wanted to thank our two speakers again. Fantastic show. We will be doing follow-up webinars. We'll keep them each time to 1 hour. Please join us. In the meantime, perhaps Claire, you can show a quick rundown of where EOPSA is going to be in the next few weeks. So we've got a number of events where you can find us. We will be speaking end of this week at the electrification fuel cell and battery development for marine vessels in Barcelona. We will be as well at the, we're organizing our own visit in Amsterdam on the 6th of April. We will be at Wind Europe talking to generation companies and making sure that they are part and parcel of the electricity being supplied to ships. Floating wind is a big event in Nantes where we will be present. And effectively, you will see this at the end of the recording. If you wish to see this again, we will be posting it on our website, on our YouTube channel, and you can follow and see what we're up to there. Again, Olivier Jamard from General Electric Power Conversion, Vincent Doudet from Sustainable Ships. Great thank you to both of you, and wishing everybody a great afternoon, and join us on the next webinars about new topics and maybe hydrogen. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
So sorry for my late joining. Thanks anyway. Hi Claire, may I get a summary of this meeting, please?